A sloth, a donkey, and a curious human. Send a prompt and see what they're doing. One hits record with a question on his mind. Two brothers pick it up, see what they find. Corn takes his time, Herman's got the facts. Back and forth, they never hold back. My weird prompts, come on in, that's where we begin. My weird prompts, glad you're here.
This episode was generated using artificial intelligence. Please verify facts.
My Weird Prompts is a community-driven initiative exploring how AI can fuel curiosity and uncover the fascinating ways our world works. GPU compute for this podcast is generously provided by Modal. Learn more at modal.com.
You know, Herman, it is a strange time to be a fan of the truth, or at least the filmed version of it. We have reached a point where there is almost too much reality to consume. Today's prompt from Daniel is about the state of the documentary industry, and he is hitting on a massive paradox. We are seeing record viewership, yet the industry is essentially drowning in its own output. It is the best of times, and the most cluttered of times.
The numbers coming out of this month are staggering, Korn. I was looking at the latest Deteintelo report from last week, and the supply-to-demand ratio for documentary content has hit 2.3 to 1. To put that in perspective for our listeners, for every hour of documentary a viewer actually wants to watch, producers are churning out more than 2 hours of content. It is a classic supply overhang. We are producing double what the market can actually absorb, yet the investment keeps pouring in.
It feels like the golden age of documentaries has become the era of the documentary landfill. But before we get too cynical, we should acknowledge that the scale of this market is enormous compared to where it was just 5 years ago. Daniel mentioned that the global market was valued at $6.8 billion last year, and it is on track to hit over $13.1 billion by 2034. That is not a niche, that is a juggernaut.
Herman Poppleberry here, by the way, for anyone keeping track of which brother is obsessing over the spreadsheets today. That growth is driven by 98 million weekly viewers in the United States alone. When you have nearly 100 million people tuning into nonfiction content every single week, the old label of niche just does not hold water anymore. We are talking about a primary driver of the global entertainment economy.
That was one of Daniel's big questions. Is it still fair to call this a niche? I mean, if you look at the Oscars from 9 days ago, on March 15th, Mr. Nobody Against Putin took home Best Documentary Feature. That film had the kind of cultural footprint that most summer blockbusters would kill for. It was not just a film. It was a geopolitical event that shifted the conversation in Washington and Brussels. It proved that a documentary can still be the most dangerous and influential tool in a filmmaker's arsenal.
And Joshua Seftel winning for All the Empty Rooms in the short category shows that even the shorter formats are gaining massive prestige. We have moved past the era where a documentary was something you were forced to watch in a high school history class because the teacher had a headache and needed to dim the lights. These are now the primary drivers of subscriber retention for platforms like Netflix and Apple TV+. They are the new prestige television. When people talk about what they watched over the weekend, they are just as likely to mention a deep dive docuseries as they are a big budget drama.
But this supply overhang you mentioned, 2.3 to 1, that suggests a bubble, does it not? We are seeing a 44% increase in demand since 2021, which is healthy, but the production side has gone into overdrive. It is like the streaming services saw one Tiger King or one true crime hit and decided to commission every single home movie ever recorded. They are stretching stories that should be 90 minutes into 6-part series just to keep people on the platform longer.
That is exactly what we discussed in episode 1310, the era of docu-bloat. That is where the market correction is starting to bite. We are seeing a shift in what it actually takes to succeed as a documentarian in 2026. It is no longer enough to just have a camera and a compelling subject. The skill set has evolved into something much more complex and, frankly, much more demanding. You can't just be a fly on the wall anymore, you have to be the architect of an entire ecosystem.
You mentioned the idea of the jack of all trades. I was reading about Ken Burns' recent keynote at Yale, and he talked about this concept of aliveness. He argues that a great documentarian has to be perpetually receptive to the moment, even when they are buried in archival footage from 100 years ago. It is about finding the pulse in the past. But how does that translate to the modern industry where you also have to be a social media manager and a data analyst?
That is the tension. The modern documentarian has to balance that classical Ken Burns aliveness with what the industry calls platform literacy. You might be filming a 4-hour deep dive into a historical event, but you also have to understand how to cut that same story into 30-second clips for TikTok or Reels without losing the narrative soul. It is a brutal workflow requirement. You are essentially making 5 different versions of the same movie simultaneously to satisfy different algorithms.
We actually talked about the technical transition to long-form storytelling back in episode 1311. One thing that has really changed since then is this rise of impact producing. It is not just about making the movie anymore. It is about building a machine around the movie to create measurable social change. It is moving beyond the screen and into the real world in a way that is highly structured.
Impact producing is becoming a rigorous, data-driven field. Look at what Concordia Studio did with Summer of Soul a few years back. They did not just release a concert film, they created a blueprint for archival restoration and cultural reclamation. They tracked how the film affected music education and archival funding. A great documentarian today needs to be part filmmaker, part community organizer, and part lobbyist. You are looking for a return on impact, not just a return on investment.
It sounds exhausting, honestly. You are fundraising, you are editing, you are directing, and then you are out there trying to change laws based on your footage. It really brings back that Ken Burns idea of being a jack of all trades. If you are not comfortable wearing 5 different hats, you are probably going to get lost in that supply overhang we talked about. The industry is moving toward these multi-hyphenate creators who can navigate the boardroom as well as the editing suite.
The reality is that the barriers to entry are lower than ever because of technology, which is why we have so much content, but the barriers to excellence have actually moved higher. To stand out, you need that rare combination of technical mastery and what Saradosa calls the patience of the observer. She just released Time and Water, and you can see that same DNA from her previous work. It is about waiting for the world to reveal itself to the lens, even when the streaming executive is screaming for a rough cut.
I wonder how that patience holds up when the industry is leaning so hard into AI tools. We have to talk about the controversy from 4 days ago. On March 20th, the film As Deep as the Grave dropped, and it included an AI-generated resurrection of Val Kilmer. It has set off an absolute firestorm regarding posthumous consent and the very nature of truth in non-fiction.
This is a massive ethical minefield. Corn. The technology has reached a point where we can recreate a person's voice, their likeness, and even their mannerisms with terrifying accuracy. But in a documentary context, which is supposed to be rooted in truth and reality, where do you draw the line? If the subject is no longer with us to give consent for their digital likeness to say things they never actually said, are we still making a documentary, or are we making a deepfake drama?
It feels like a betrayal of the contract with the audience. If I am watching a documentary, I am assuming that what I am seeing and hearing actually happened. If we start peppering in synthetic performances, the whole genre loses its foundation. It is one thing to use AI for de-aging or cleaning up grainy audio from the 1970s, but resurrecting a performer to deliver new lines, that feels like a bridge too far. It turns the documentary into a puppet show.
The industry is grappling with this right now. We are seeing a split between the high-budget, AI-integrated productions and the independent sector that is doubling down on raw, unvarnished truth. The CPH Docs Festival in Copenhagen just wrapped up yesterday, on March 23rd. The top award went to Dongnan Chen, spelled Dongnancchen, for her film Whispers in May. That film is the antithesis of the Val Kilmer project. It is intimate, human, and relies entirely on the strength of the captured moment.
It is interesting that while the big streamers are chasing these high-tech gimmicks, the grant-making organizations are leaning into hard science and independent voices. The Sundance Institute and Sandbox Films just announced 16 new grant recipients for science-focused nonfiction yesterday. These projects are coming from 11 different countries. That tells me there is still a deep hunger for documentaries that actually teach us something about the physical world, not just the digital one.
There is a clear divide forming. On one side, you have the massive streaming deals, like the $1.2 billion agreement between Netflix and the BBC Natural History Unit. That is all about high-gloss, blue-chip nature series that look incredible on a 4K screen, but often follow a very predictable formula. They are designed to be safe, beautiful, and globally exportable. On the other side, you have the festival circuit like FEEPH Doc and the International Documentary Association, or the IDFA, which are protecting the more experimental and investigative work.
That BBC deal is fascinating because it shows how much the streamers are willing to pay for content that has a long shelf life. A nature documentary about the deep sea does not age the same way a political documentary does. It is a safer bet in an ad-supported model, which is where Netflix and Apple TV Plus are moving. They need content that people will watch over and over again while they sit through commercials. It is the comfort food of the documentary world.
Streaming fatigue is a real factor here. Viewers are getting tired of the docu-bloat era. You know the type, a story that could have been a tight 90-minute film, but gets stretched into a 6-part docuseries because the platform needs more minutes of engagement to satisfy advertisers. The supply overhang is partly a result of that stretching. We are seeing a lot of thin content that doesn't justify the time investment.
So, if you are a listener who loves this genre, but feels overwhelmed by the sheer volume of mediocre content on your home screen, where do you go? Daniel asked about communities and festivals. It seems like the real action is happening away from the main streaming algorithms. If you want the good stuff, you have to go looking for the curators.
If you want to find the community, you have to look at the hubs like the IDA or the Sundance Institute. But for the actual experience of connecting with other fans, the festivals are where it is at. Full Frame is coming up in mid-April from the 16th to the 19th. They are doing a tribute to Don Porter, who is a powerhouse in the industry. Those smaller, dedicated festivals offer a curated experience that you just cannot get by scrolling through a menu of 1,000 titles.
Curated is the key word there. In a world with a 2.3 to 1 supply to demand ratio, the curator is more important than the creator in some ways. We need people to sift through the noise and tell us what actually matters. That is why organizations like the Sundance Institute are so vital. When they put their stamp on a project through a grant, it is a signal to the audience that this is worth their time. It is a filter for quality in an ocean of quantity.
And it is worth noting that these communities are becoming more global. The 16 grants from Sandbox Films went to creators in 11 countries. We are seeing incredible work coming out of places that were historically excluded from the documentary mainstream. The technology to film and edit has become so accessible that the bottleneck is no longer the gear, it is the vision and the ethics. You can make a world-class documentary on a smartphone now, but you still need a world-class perspective.
Speaking of ethics, I wonder if the Val Kilmer controversy will lead to actual legislation. We have seen similar debates in the music industry with AI vocals, but in documentaries, the stakes feel different because of that implied promise of truth. If a documentary can lie to me using a dead person's face, why should I trust any documentary at all? It undermines the entire genre's credibility.
That is the existential threat. If we lose the truth, we just have another form of fiction. The strength of a great documentary is that it compels you to go research the subject, as Daniel mentioned. It sparks a curiosity about the real world. If that spark is based on a digital fabrication, the whole relationship is broken. We are seeing the IDA start to discuss formal guidelines for AI use, but the tech is moving faster than the policy.
I think the way forward is going to require a lot more transparency. Maybe we need a standard set of disclosures, like nutritional labels for films. This much is archival, this much is reenactment, and this part was generated by a model. It would be a nightmare for the aesthetic flow of the film, but it might be the only way to save the credibility of the industry in 2026.
We are already seeing some movement in that direction within the IDFA. They are discussing provenance watermarks for nonfiction content. But as we discussed, the technology is moving so much faster. By the time we have a rule about digital resurrections, the industry will have moved on to something even more complex, like fully synthetic environments that are indistinguishable from real locations.
It makes me appreciate the veterans like Ken Burns even more. He has stuck to his guns for decades, focusing on the human voice and the still image. There is a weight to that kind of storytelling that a billion-dollar BBC deal can never quite replicate. It is about the soul of the work, not just the resolution of the footage. It is about the aliveness of the human connection.
That aliveness he talks about is exactly what is missing from a lot of the supply overhang content. When a film is manufactured to hit a certain number of minutes for a streaming platform, it feels dead. It feels like a product, not a piece of art. The great documentarians, the ones Daniel is looking for, are the ones who are still willing to let the subject lead the way, even if it leads somewhere unprofitable or uncomfortable.
So, to answer Daniel's first question, no, it is definitely not a niche anymore. It is a massive, multi-billion-dollar industry that is currently undergoing a painful but necessary market correction. The streamers are realizing they cannot just buy their way into prestige. They actually have to support the artists who have the skills we discussed, the impact producers, and the platform-literate storytellers.
And those skills are becoming more diverse every day. If you want to be a documentarian in 2026, you need to be a storyteller, a technician, and a moral philosopher all at once. You have to navigate the ethics of AI while simultaneously figuring out how to make your story resonate on a smartphone screen and a cinema screen. It is a high wire act.
For the enthusiasts out there, my advice would be to look for the grants and the festivals. Look at who the Sundance Institute is supporting. Look at the winners from CPH Docs or IDFA. Stop letting the algorithm tell you what is real, and start looking for the curators who are actually doing the work of sifting through that supply overhang. Support independent festivals like Full Frame.
The market will eventually balance itself out. The bubble of mediocre, stretched-out docuseries will burst because viewers are getting smarter. They can tell when a story is being padded. The shift toward ad-supported models might actually help in a weird way, because it forces platforms to care more about consistent quality rather than just bulk minutes of content. If people stop watching after 10 minutes because it is boring, the advertisers won't pay.
I hope so. I would hate to see the genre that gave us things like Mr. Nobody Against Putin get buried under a mountain of AI-generated filler. There is something sacred about the documentary form. It is our collective memory, our way of making sense of a world that often feels like it is spinning out of control. We need it to be true, now more than ever.
The fact that 98 million people are still watching every week gives me hope. The demand is there. People want to understand their world. We just need to make sure the industry does not lose sight of the truth in the pursuit of the next $13 billion. The human element is what makes a documentary work, and no AI can replicate that aliveness Ken Burns talks about.
I think that is a good place to leave it for now. We have covered the market data, the ethical minefields, and the evolving skill sets of the people behind the camera. It is a messy landscape, but there is still plenty of incredible work being done if you know where to look.
The documentary is not dead, it is just crowded. We just have to be better at finding the signals in the noise. And we have to keep holding filmmakers accountable for the truth.
Well said, Herman Poppleberry. I think you have earned your hay for the day after that deep dive into the industry numbers. You really went full spreadsheet on us today.
I will take it. There is always more research to do, though, especially with the Full Frame Festival coming up next month. I want to see what Dawn Porter has to say about the state of investigative work in this AI era. Her perspective is going to be vital.
We will have to keep an eye on that. Thanks to Daniel for the prompt that sent us down this rabbit hole. It is a topic that definitely deserves more than a surface-level look, especially with how fast things are moving this year.
It is always a pleasure to dig into these with you, Korn. Your skeptical eye keeps my data-driven enthusiasm grounded. It is a good balance.
That is what brothers are for, right? To make sure we do not get too lost in the spreadsheets or the hype.
I suppose so.
We should probably wrap this up before we start analyzing the documentary potential of our own conversation. I can already see you framing the shots.
Too late, I have already mapped out the 3-act structure and the potential for a TikTok spin-off series. We could call it the Spreadsheet Chronicles.
Of course you have. Let us get out of here. Big thanks to our producer, Hilbert Flumingtop, for keeping the gears turning behind the scenes and making sure we don't sound like robots.
And a huge thank you to Modal for providing the GPU credits that power the generation of this show. We literally could not do this without that infrastructure. It is the backbone of our production.
This has been My Weird Prompts. If you want to explore our archive of over 1,400 episodes, head over to myweirdprompts.com. You can search for topics like AI ethics, film production, or even our deep dives into historical archives.
We're also on Telegram if you want to get notified the second a new episode drops. Just search for My Weird Prompts there and join the community.
See you all in the next one. Keep looking for the truth.
Take care, everyone. Watch something real today.
This episode was generated using Gemini Flash 3. Text-to-speech engine was Chatterbox.
Thanks for listening to our show, My Weird Prompts, where our thoughts go from slow takes to facts on cue. We change and follow through. My Weird Prompts, that's the close from sloth